Well, this evening I'd like to talk to you about the law of karma. In the Dhammapada, which is a collection of short and pithy teachings of the Buddha, the very first teaching is about the law of karma. All phenomena, it says, are preceded by mind. So whatever mental state we are experiencing, the results of that will follow us, like a shadow, or the wheel of an ox cart follows the footprints of the ox. If we speak or act with a pure mind, then the results will be correspondingly. If we speak or act with a defiled or corrupt or impure mind, then the results will correspond. So this is essentially the law of karma in a nutshell, but the Buddha also said the workings of karma were so intricate that if one tried to understand all of the details of the law of karma, it would drive you crazy. It's one of the 4 inconceivables. So I won't try to explain every detail of the law of karma because that would be inconceivable and I don't wish to drive you crazy. However, this will just be a taste, enough of a taste, enough to get us thinking about the law of karma and how we can apply that in a practical way in our daily life. So we may be more familiar with the popular term karma. For example, that's the Sanskrit version. Often that is bound up with ideas of a bit of mystical fatalism, as if, well, it's just his karma, right? I had no choice, it's just my karma, as if somehow things are fixed. Now, the Buddha was very clear that things are not fixed, and there is the idea of things being predetermined. He denied that that's the way the cosmos works. So when he talked about karma, and I'll use the Pali term, K-A-M-M-A, instead of the Sanskrit karma. So when he talked about karma, he was talking about action, a dynamic relationship every moment. How we respond to this moment will then create our future. So if you imagine the entire history of the universe has led through its series of causes and conditions and results to this moment, this particular moment, the entire history of the universe has led to this moment, and there's nothing that we can do about that. We can't change that. We can be happy about that. We can enjoy the way things are. We can be upset about the way things are, but we can't change it. It's already happened. But how we respond to that, that's within our control to change. So how we respond to this present moment will then literally begin to change our future. So even if we have very deeply ingrained habits, and it feels like, I have to respond this way. It feels like there's no free will. I just have to respond in this way. Then we do actually have the ability through training. Sometimes it takes a bit of mental training to be able to have the strength of mind, to be able to reply to this present moment in a wise way. So we may talk about good karma and bad karma, and that's an easy way to talk about good and bad. And if you do good, you receive good, and if you do bad, you receive bad. But it's actually much more complicated than that. And even the terms good or bad are very subject to personal interpretation. I mean, so how do we? Sometimes we use the word good just based on what gives us pleasure. If a food is delicious, say, hey, that sandwich is really good. That artwork is really good. Right? Why? Because it gives us pleasure. It gives me pleasure. Right? Say, how was the weather today? Oh, the weather was really good. Or you say the weather's no good today. So why? Because it either gives us pleasure or it doesn't give us pleasure. Right? So that's more of a hedonistic sense of the use of good. Right? Or sometimes it's just a utilitarian way that we use the word good. If something works, then we call it good. If something doesn't work, we say it's no good. But in a moral sense, even in a moral sense, what we consider good or bad will often be dependent on particular cultures or eras. What may be considered good in one culture is not considered good in another culture. What's quite acceptable and praiseworthy in one culture is considered quite worthy of blame in another culture. So using these words good and bad, even though we might use them just for convenience sake, an ordinary way of speaking, the Buddha was much more precise in how he used terms. So he referred to the Pali terms kusala and akusala. Now, whenever we translate into English, sometimes it's difficult to come up with terms that really encapsulate the essence of what we want to explain. But kusala is what we translate as wholesome now. Right? Generally, that's the accepted word that we use, wholesome, and akusala, unwholesome. So the Buddha was much more precise in how he defined wholesome and unwholesome. That which is arising from defilements, anything overt or subtle that it's arising from impure intentions, is considered unwholesome. And I'll speak a bit more about that, what constitutes defilements. Okay. So the essence of karma, in the way the Buddha used the term, doesn't specifically have to do with the actions of our body. It doesn't specifically have to do with what we say. It doesn't even specifically have to do with what we think, but it's the energy of the mind that leads to thoughts, speech, and action. All right? So in Pali, this is called cetana. I'm going to call this intention in English. Now, of course, the word intention in English may not fully cover this idea that the Buddha was trying to convey. Because sometimes they say, we're careless. And we say, I didn't intend to do that. We do something, we didn't intend to do that. I didn't intend to, run that red light and cause an accident. But it doesn't mean we didn't have some karma involved with that, because maybe we were careless. So this movement of the mind, which leads to thinking, which leads to speech, which leads to action, this is the essence of karma. This is the essence of karma. And karma itself is action. The results of karma has a different term. We call vipaka. Say the results of karma. Right? So you have karma, which is the active, dynamic part of this process, and then you have the corresponding results. Often in everyday speech, we may confuse them. Right? We just kind of use the term a bit more loosely. So the Buddha was actually very precise in how we use these terms. So when we talk about intention, right? Now intention is very closely related to motivation. But let's say you have the intention to harm, or you have the intention even to kill. Now, the motivation could be a whole range of why we intend to kill, and that will affect the results. So the law of karma is not a simple one-to-one relationship. You do this, you're going to get this result. Right? Do that, you're going to get that result. There's a wide range of causes and conditions and mitigating factors which will affect the result. There are certain aspects that we can look to of the law of karma which will help to explain general patterns. So for example, if you have the intention to, say, kill, for example, one factor that will affect the outcome is what is it that we intend to kill. Right? This is just one of the many factors involved. So for example, if you intend to kill a mosquito, and if you intend to kill an elephant, and you go through with it, even though the intention to kill is the same, the elephant, because of its very nature, will carry a heavier result. Right? It's not to say there isn't any bad karma in killing a mosquito, because even mosquitoes are sentient beings that have a right to live. But the object, that will make a difference. The intensity of the intention will make a difference. Right? So if we have a weak or fuzzy intention and we follow it, then that will have a less strong effect. The result will tend to be equally fuzzy or weak. But if we have an extremely strong intention, we're highly motivated to do something and we follow through with it, then that will make a greater impact on our minds. So this law of karma, you can just see within our own minds. If there's a very strong intention, that will leave a strong imprint, and then the results tend to follow accordingly. When we talk about wholesome intentions, what is it exactly that we mean? Right? If you are acting on kindness, acting on movement of the mind of generosity, that has to do with giving or giving up. If you're motivated by compassion, there's a whole range of wholesome intentions, which by their very nature will lead to wholesome results. And for many of these intentions, you don't have to wait for future lifetimes. You don't have to wait very long at all to see the results. If you have an intention of compassion or kindness, immediately that feels pleasant. If you have an intention of anger, immediately that is unpleasant. Physically it's unpleasant. Mentally it's unpleasant as well, even though there is a certain addictive factor to being angry. Something is pleasant about it, because it reinforces our sense of self and me being right. But mostly, even just the intention of being angry is already immediately unpleasant, even before other results come back at us. Right? So any movement of the mind that's coming from aversion, even subtle sense of frustration, right? This is going to be unwholesome. It's going to lead to unpleasant results in the future. It doesn't have to be extreme anger, right? It doesn't have to be extreme anger, but sometimes just the persistent niggling, frustration, aversion, dissatisfaction, is that creates a very strong habit, and then that can really, really deeply affect our level of happiness, right? Leading to depression, just chronic worrying. Worrying is just based on, the idea of something happening in the future that we don't like. This idea, and there's aversion to this idea of what might happen in the future, and just that, is very painful. And this is how we can measure the results of good and bad karma. Right? The Buddha was not so concerned about results such as wealth, status, how we look. All these things are also based on a law of cause and effect as well, right? But what he was most concerned about was essentially the level of happiness in our minds. And the level of happiness in our minds is based on how pure our minds are. And the more we experience anger, the more we experience a sense of greed, selfishly desiring things, that by its very nature is going to lead to unhappiness. So this is the way the Buddha defined unwholesome states of mind, unwholesome intention, anything that's arising from the roots of greed, anger, or delusion. Now, rampant greed generally in society, even in mainstream society, is considered a negative quality. However, there's many more subtle forms of greed which are pernicious. They're destructive. They're not conducive to our own happiness. And just because something is praised in society doesn't mean it's actually going to be good karma. So this is where mindfulness and awareness becomes extremely important. Watching our minds, closely observing our minds every moment. You see how important that is, because even if we're not paying attention, we're still making karma all the time. Often it's habitual. Sometimes it might be culturally conditioned. Depending on what culture we find ourselves in, depend on what habits we have, depending on what family we grow up in. All of these things will condition, what intentions are habitually developed. So once we start to see more clearly what is it that is motivating us, then at least we begin to have the opportunity to exert some influence on our future. Otherwise, we're just reacting like a robot. Something happens and we react in a particular way. Someone pushes our button and there's a conditioned response. But someone can still push our button and we're aware, but then we realize, no, what kind of future do I want to have? Do I want to have a future which is just going to be an endless perpetuation of this habit, especially if it's a negative habit that's not beneficial? I said, no, we don't have to do that. We have the ability to overcome that and respond in a wise way. So these intentions that arise from greed or from anger or frustration or from delusion. Delusion is essentially states of lack of clarity, not clear understanding, or misunderstanding the nature of reality. Anytime we have misunderstanding or just general confusion, right, that's going to also perpetuate. And that may be the most difficult of the intentions to see. By its very nature, it's cloudy, it's not clear. So closely watching our intentions moment by moment and seeing, do these intentions, how do they correlate with our deeper values in life? How do they relate to a future that we would like to experience? Are they actually leading to benefit for ourselves and others? Why is it that we do what we do? How is it that we've ended up in this stage of life? Right? Everything that we have at this moment, at this particular phase of life, how is it that we've ended up here? Mainly, it's the result of actions and speech and thoughts based on our own intentions. Now, not everything that we experience in life is a result of our personal karma. Right? There are other factors of cause and effect at play, such as the weather. But what determines our level of happiness or unhappiness, and most of what we experience in life, is a result of our personal the karma that we've made in the past. So in one sense, it's a relief to know that, because it gets tiring to blame all of our problems on other people. And just to be able to take responsibility, say, well, wherever I am at this stage in life, whether we like it or we don't like it, we take responsibility for that. Because blaming is the easiest thing to do. Blaming others, blaming the situation, blaming the government, just blaming. But actually taking responsibility for this particular situation, for this level of happiness or dissatisfaction that we experience. Okay, well, this is really the result of how I have been developing my own intentions, and this is the result that I'm experiencing.